Let's just illustrate how deep in the red that General Motors is. This is according to GM's bankruptcy court filing. Take a look at that. $82 billion in assets, nearly $173 billion in debts owed to more than 100,000 creditors, if you can believe it. Well, here to weigh in on what the new GM will look like and what's in it for you, the American taxpayer, Peter Kaufman, head of restructuring and distressed M&A at the Gordian Group. Peter, it's so good of you to be here.
Good morning.
How much is this going to cost the taxpayer ultimately, you think? Because we talk about $50 billion. Is the price tag going to be a great deal higher? And is it a good use of taxpayer dollars?
Well, I believe that the price tag is going to be well in excess of $50 billion, because I think $50 billion is the number if General Motors can achieve its sales goal of 10 million cars a year. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. My own personal view, I think the taxpayer could be on the hook here for a lot more money than that. I've seen estimates $75–100 billion. Is
it the best use of money, though? How should we have handled it? Because, again, at the end of the day, would it have cost more to the taxpayers if General Motors had been allowed to go bankrupt at the end of last year, or even liquidate, or maybe less?
Well, you have to ask the question, as you and I have been asking for many months now, is $100 billion better spent trying to ameliorate the downfall of General Motors and help workers find other jobs and help the system, as opposed to trying to not bail out, not simply prop up, but try to restart General Motors? I think that's an important question. And the jury's out on that.
Jury's out. Connell?
You know, it's interesting, Dagan, as I'm hearing Peter talk about a number about $75–100 billion as we come here from the GM building and try to figure out some of the financials behind all of this. I'm trying to wrap my arms around that, Peter, because when you think about it, $50 billion, let's just say that's the number now. That's it. They're going to get an equity stake in the company for that. At some point, that equity stake will be sold, recouping some percentage of the investment. It may not be all of it, but some of it. But you still fear the losses for the U.S. taxpayer could approach $100 billion? I mean, are you incorporating the money we might get back when we sell the stake?
Well, this segues into another interesting issue, Connor, which is the role of the taxpayer here and the role of the government. Government's wearing multiple hats here. Is the government going to be overseeing General Motors for the taxpayer to earn a profit and get its money back immediately? What if a buyer comes in next week and says, we'll pay you $20 billion or $10 billion or $5 billion? Is the judgment going to be made if that's in the taxpayer's best interest? Or is the government going to keep putting taxpayer money in here to try and prop up General Motors, keep union jobs alive? Is the government going to have its eye on a business plan which is going to produce clean and green cars for political and policy goals, as opposed to what's in the best economic interest of U.S. taxpayers? So I think all of those are very complicated issues and are important here.
Let me take one of the biggest issues you raised there, and I've heard this from a number of industry analysts as well, is this idea of the government dictating the type of car that is going to be made. I mean, to me and to a lot of people, that seems to be the biggest concern going in. Even if the company emerges leaner and meaner and the financials look good, the company's telling you the government's telling you what kind of car to make, maybe some big trouble down the road, right?
I would think that you would not want the United States government managing a business and dictating a business plan, because, in my view, it's probably not going to end up very profitable for the U.S. taxpayer. But I think that presupposes that the goal here was to make money for the taxpayer. That's clearly not the case. Government has made a policy decision that whatever it takes here, however many billions, $50, $100 billion, it's going to prop up General Motors and try and restart it. I don't think the taxpayer recouping money is very high on the list of government priorities.
Now, do you ever look at this, Peter, and say, well, there is some investment opportunity here? I mean, we talk about the different types of bankruptcies that are happening, or the one bankruptcy with the split between the new and the old GM. I mean, how does somebody in your seat that looks at distressed investments view, say, the old GM and the liquidation process there?
There's not been a lot of attention paid to the old GM. We'll have to see how that plays out under the aegis of Al Koch. But I will say this: if there had been private capital available, if someone found the new GM to be appealing, I would think the government would have been all over that and be able to say, gee, we've got private investors coming in side by side with us. That isn't the case. Taxpayers are putting in money where private capital apparently has not been interested in putting money. And I'll tell you something else. The trampling of bankruptcy rights, in my view, that's happening here, treating unsecured creditors differently, the unions getting preferential treatment over unsecured bondholders, is going to put a deep crimp in any new capital coming into this business auto businesses, wherever there's a union, wherever there's a perceived potential U.S. government policy goal, I think people are going to think very carefully, institutions are, before committing capital. And if they do commit the capital, I think that they're going to make it a lot more expensive than before, because they used to know what their downside was because of our vibrant and well-established bankruptcy laws. They clearly don't know what that downside is anymore.
You're essentially saying investors aren't going to loan money, and if they will, they're going to extract a greater price to lend money to any business that is unionized, that might need government aid, that the government might have even the slightest control over. That's what you're saying.
That is exactly what I'm saying. There's a systemic concern here that it simply isn't just what's happening in General Motors. The government wanted this to come out. They wanted the union to get the whatever deal, and they wanted the bondholders to not share ratably in what the consideration that's being offered. That has a ripple effect. I am concerned about that. Absolutely.
The government talks about getting out or beginning to sell off some of the ownership stake in General Motors, but how do you envision that? Do you think that it will happen in pieces? And to your point, who would want to buy it if the government still has some stake in the company and then tries to sell off some of the stake to the public?
That all remains to be seen. I can't imagine a private investor wanting to put capital in side by side here with the U.S. government, with the overhang of government policy goals, fealty to unions, etc. That's just inconceivable to me.
At the end of the day, do you think that the new company remains viable and remains together in the long haul, or will the brands get split up or even just closed down?
Well, not to pick on your word choice, remains viable assumes that it's viable today, and it's not. It remains to be seen if it can become a viable entity. And that's going to require a good business plan. That's going to require a good management team to carry it out, as well as the operational fixes that they're putting in place. And I give them a lot of credit. They have been or are continuing to do a lot of operational fixes, which is important, but it's not everything. You need a great business plan. You need a great management team to carry it out. I don't see that management team on the field today.
And the management team, is it going to be installed by the government? Right?
It's the golden rule. He who has the gold rules, and the government has brought the gold to the party.
It's a lot messier. It's unprecedented that the government's doing this, and it's so much messier. I'm just glad, Peter, that you're here to, well, observe it and report on it for us. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Peter Kaufman of the Gordian Group.